I'll have to mute myself every time when I don't
We're
speak,
live
I guess.
now. Welcome to democratic deficit in the European Union. This term of democratic deficit has been coined by young European federalists in 1977 when we were fighting on the streets to get the European Parliament more democratic and directly elected. Thing we actually achieved afterwards. But it seems that the term is being used now by Eurosceptics. Even though it's supposed to mean more Europe, they're using it to sound like we need less Europe because of the democratic deficit. Even though the idea of democratic deficit is that there's not enough Europe to cover for it. So first, I would like to talk to you guys about what do you understand when you hear democratic deficit. Like, just take your swing this concept. Stefan, would you like to start first?
Sorry, did you say me?
Yes.
Okay, yes. Well, the democratic deficit is a really interesting and difficult issue because it is something that everybody seems to care about, especially as people get more polarized, either very pro EU or very Eurosceptic. Um, Now, it is understood in different ways according to which position you have, and the Eurosceptics often get a reputation for a bit of cognitive dissonance when it comes to this, because fixing the democratic deficit, according to the Europhiles, like having a directly elected commission or president, is something that would be sort of a quasi-federalist or at least integrationist initiative, which you would think that the Eurosceptics would be very much against. But there really isn't that much dissonance, after all, on the Eurosceptic side. When they talk about democratic deficit, what they usually mean is that things like the European Parliament is an undemocratic body, given that they think that the European peoples are not really a single people, and therefore you do not have the demos, and therefore you cannot have democracy. So, for for if they were to fix the democratic deficit, they would want something very close to how the European Economic Community used to work, with a lot of intergovernmentalism and unanimous decisions only. Um, where the cognitive dissonance comes in, however, is that when Herman van Rompuy, for instance, was elected as president of the council, the Eurosceptic side, especially Nigel Farage from UKIP, gave him a lot of flack for the fact that nobody in Europe had voted for him, despite that the kind of democracy there where the leaders of the different nations come together and elect somebody is kind of the democracy that they would advocate. So, but it seems to be something that works with voters. So there is some cognitive dissonance. But the way that I understand the democratic deficit is that currently we only have one directly democratically elected body in the European Union, European Parliament, and I would reckon that to fix the democratic deficit, more institutions would have to be more or less directly elected by the people of Europe.
Okay. Thank you, Stefan. Edgar, what's your take on first take on democratic deficit?
About the democratic deficit, well, I can agree with. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yeah. Well, you can speak louder.
Okay. Well, I can agree with Stefan with cases when it comes to missing the people power, which is a big case. But I think it's not only about whether the European Parliament is or not elected by the people. In this case, sort of it is, but it's also, to me, well, I don't know who made the term democratic deficit. As I looked it up, it was coined by the European Federalists, but if we would have to talk about the lack of democracy in that sense, then the practice of a democratic society, I would expect people to be engaged not only in electing their representatives, but also being part of the democratic process, like when decisions are being made. So I think it's not even enough to elect representatives in a society, in a country, or in any institution. It has to be also actively involved in what issues people have in the society. Oh, and also vice versa, the people have to be also involved in what is happening in the institutions. Otherwise, that could be one of the reasons why Eurosceptic point of view when it comes to how democratic is the European Union kind of prevails in terms of it is failing or it's not working properly because of this missing part of a democratic foundation, as you could call it, or deficit it is. So I don't know if I can explain it or describe my thoughts more than that.
Okay.
But if there any discussion coming up, then we can take it further.
Okay, thank you, Edgar. Manuel, would you like to say what it means for you?
I think that when I think about the term democratic deficit, I think there can be the two lines that has been referred. On the one sense, many things about election on the European institutions are not done. We have European Parliament, and also the centralization of power, where many people in several countries feel that the European Union decides on several topics for them, and the governments have to accept it because of the terms they have within the European Union. On the other sense, I also think about it on a societal level, especially for in many countries, the younger generations are disengaged from societal activity, societal engagement, and also on their democratic participation, for example, in elections, where the younger generations they don't care that much about politics, and when they have the chance, for example, to vote about something, uh, most of them don't even show up to vote.
Okay, thank you, Manuel. Well, I'll now take my view, not my view, but what I see that many experts in the, because as a Social Europe supporter, I'm kind of following what the Social Europe experts are saying. So, from a social perspective, Europe's democratic deficit is twofold. First, we lack European citizens, the demos, which is indeed an essential ingredient for power, kratie, to become democracy, the power of people. We have many people in Europe who don't consider themselves or identify themselves as Europeans. They still think of themselves as Germans, as Romanians, as Latvians, and so on. This lack of European identity throughout its member states is to a large extent due to cultural and language barriers and a lack of common communication forms. I mean, let's take newspapers, for example. Newspapers in southern countries reported about the tragic effects of the financial crisis, such as the massive unemployment, and discussed the problems of banks that are too big to fail, while newspapers in the north of Europe hardly mentioned these problems. In countries such as Germany or the Netherlands, one had the impression there was no crisis at all. The second democratic deficit of the EU, from experts' opinion in the social Europe, is its lack of democratic decision-making. Many authors are calling it the post-democracy. It implies that non-elected institutions such as the European Court of Justice, the European Commission, and the European Central Bank govern Europe rather than the elected representatives of the European Parliament. Therefore, I would like to ask this, what can we do in order to, let's start with the first thing, demos. what can we do about creating a truly European demos? Who would like to be first?
Yeah, well, I can maybe take further on. Should I?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, can I ask who you were quoting again?
I was quoting several experts from the Social Europe movement.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Well, when you mentioned about the identity part and that having a relation to the democratic process or the structure, the demos, I don't find that as a convincing part that, or as a vital part of the democratic society. I think it's not about whether you feel yourself as a European or yourself someone else. I feel myself as a world citizen, so I would never identify myself as European or as something else. But as a citizen of a country or whatever place where I live, I have a responsibility to be involved in the democratic process. And if you look about between countries in a smaller scale, I think it's the same case. It's like it's about how much trust do people have to their system, even if, despite they might be identified as Germans or French or whatever, they might vote and they might not vote, depending how trusted their government is. If we look at places maybe like Switzerland, where it's more decentralized form of federation, people have different ways of being also involved in democratic process. I think there only have 2 cantons left where the people have very direct influence in the policy making. But I think that is one question that rises, is about how much can we get citizens to be involved in this process, as I mentioned before. That in one way how to get the demos back is to make them feel that they have an influence, maybe, and if their opinion is not ignored, where in the sense of their direct power, that would be an impossible way of ignoring their opinion, then they could reestablish the trust in the institutions that serve them, in this case the European institutions. That's probably one suggestion I could give. And I think the other question is also, is electing representatives is all about that? You know, maybe we should also question about the election process. Electing representatives once every 5 years in the parliament is like, well, you do that and then you go away to your normal lives, and the majority of whatever that representative is going to do, you will probably ignore and will not have time to even follow up. But the media will follow you up on only small, specific, interesting points. But that's pretty much it. So, and I think we can kind of draw a parallel logic to local elections as well. I mean, they're also different, and how people feel to be more connected to them, that kind of level has to be reached also globally or Europe-wide level. So I think maybe Switzerland or other countries that have a more successful practice of democracy could be a good example for us to learn as well. Not to centralize it too much on the institutions, but do it the opposite way.
So in a way, you're talking about direct democracy as a solution.
yes, as much as possible. It's a more complicated system, especially as we're talking about wide scale. But as I said, the participation is the most important one. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to give out voting rights to every policy, to every citizen, to vote on everything. There certainly is going to be some representatives representing certain groups of the society. Maybe they shouldn't be even representing a country. Maybe they should be representing different fields of people. Teachers, like the unions, have different representatives. Maybe they should be also involved, because at your workplace you'll definitely will be more concerned with what is going on at your work, at your union that is supposed to protect you, but not as a general politician that is just representing a country which you don't feel connection because it personally to you is far reached, you know what I mean? So that could be maybe another way of looking at it. Not putting politicians that we elect in terms of borders, but maybe they should be representing several districts or maybe cities, or yeah, that's all about logistics now. So these are my proposals, maybe for discussion.
Okay, thank you, Edgar.
Yeah.
Stefan, would you like to take the speaking mic?
Yes, me. Yes, I very much like to. I think that Edgar is mentioning a lot of very interesting things. I think we need to sort of get back to the subsidiary principle, and possibly as a component to that have some form of direct democracy, because we need to engage the people in some way. One of the biggest problems that the union has is a complete lack of interest. You would see that the EU is seen as a homogeneous entity or homogeneous other. So whenever a decision is being made, you would always see in the media that the EU wants to do this and that. Sometimes it will there will be articles about law proposals that have not even gone to have not been voted for yet. So something ludicrous that some obscure politician might propose that has absolutely no chance of getting approved by either the Council of Ministers or the Parliament would still get in the newspapers. And I think in the national context, when there is a ridiculous law that is being passed, people will not blame the institutions of the state as a whole. They will usually, very meticulously so sometimes, look at, okay, so who proposed this law? Who voted for it? Who voted against it? Okay, the people who voted against it, I will not be voting for those again. Those who voted for it, I'll be... And then that doesn't happen in the EU. Even though that the European Parliament is one of the most transparent parliaments in the world, where you can pretty much check up on everything on the internet, people don't do this. So they don't know which party voted for what. And that means that you have some very unresponsive elections, because people usually vote either in a protest, as a protest vote, or they vote for what they've always voted for, because the parliamentaries in the European Parliament, the people don't know what they've been doing. They have absolutely no idea what they've been voted for or against in any regard. So if we could sort of change that by getting people engaged through some form of direct democracy, where people can see, okay, this is the law that we're voting for. And if a ridiculous law gets voted in, people will not really blame the European Union as a whole. They'll probably blame themselves, or which I think might be a bit healthy in a democracy, that the people feel that they are in power of something. So if there comes something ridiculous to the table, they'll not just dismiss the whole thing. They'll kind of look at themselves, okay, yeah, we messed up here, but it was our doing it, so democracy. So that could be a solution, although it might be mentioned that too much direct democracy can be very harmful, because then you sort of open the gates to populism. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but in Switzerland, it wasn't until the 70s that on a federal level women were allowed to vote, and I think the last canton in Switzerland where women were allowed to vote happened sometimes in the early 90s. So sort of things like that might happen in a direct democracy, but that is always a sort of risk.
Before we, well, we have to look at this. We have people that support the European Union and they say there is no democratic deficit, because if you look at the democratic legitimacy, we actually have two sources. We have the directly elected EU Parliament, then we have the Council of Ministers and the Council of Europe, where is the heads of the states, which are in turn directly elected to be there. Therefore, the EU Council is. And then again, the EU Commission is being appointed by the Parliament and the Council together. Therefore, the Commission as well is responsive to directly elected representatives. Therefore, there is a case that there is no democratic deficit in the European Union. There is just the current model can be changed to another model of democracy, but that does not mean that this current model has a democratic deficit. That's one case. Another case made by our organization since 1977, as we also created the term, is that we believe that people need to have more say in what's happening. But again, referendums have proven themselves to not be a very good tool until now. They have proven that people are not well informed, or they don't have the time, or they don't care enough to take a proper decision. Therefore, I'm not sure if direct democracy will be a good solution in this case. Do you have any comments on these two? Edgar?
Yeah. Well, I want to add in a small comment also to what Stefan just was saying as well about direct democracy, and that's actually a good thing that he points out. Also the pros and cons. We have to consider both, and I can add it also a bit more recent incidents about Switzerland, where in regards to refugee situation, where I think several cantons, or maybe the entire country, has voted to make restrictions towards refugee or the migration policy, and that was also a huge controversial thing about it, right? But I think that's the disadvantage of a direct democracy, meaning it doesn't mean that progress stops, but it goes much slower, probably, because it is complicated. But about what you said, Narcis, about these appointed representatives, like, as you mentioned, the members of the European Commission that are being appointed or elected in the European Parliament, which is elected by the people. I don't consider that personally to be democratic, because if my representative appoints someone that appoints someone that appoints someone, I obviously will not know who they are, and I have no connection to their interests. My representative might have different other personal interests, and me electing the representative was probably certain points, like why I voted for that person. He probably had a campaign, maybe, or certain views that I said, okay, I vote for you because I support your views and your promises, if you had. But if he does the same towards someone else, those views can be completely different. So they not necessarily are the same with his promises that he gave as a member of the parliament. Then he elects a member of a commission, which could be from a completely different party even, right? And that's the case, for example, right? None of the European Commission members represent my political field, even though I voted for a European Parliament member that's completely from a different European political group. So that's one way is how you can see why it's not democratic to do so. That's why one of the reasons why the UN is so distant as well, because they're only representatives going there, and then we kind of get a small glimpse from the TV what happened there, blah blah, and that's why also people kind of get distance even from these huge organizations that are very important, no doubt. And you mentioning about referendums, I think that's another thing. It's a challenging part. It is one way of how to practice direct power or influence from people. And there's a good example, though, from the anti-TTIP movement, which was gathering a referendum Europe-wide, that gathered up to, I think they gathered 3 million signatures. Of course, their most active members were in Germany, I believe, and maybe in other European countries, but these whole 3 million signatures were gathered all across Europe. So any sister organizations that they had were doing their contribution to it as well. So that's the thing, you know, this referendum kind of gets limited by borders or slowed down. And that's where, when I mentioned that when our political actions are within our borders still, it's kind of hard to jump across, you know, the border. Even though it's physically not there, political wise or sense, yeah, it's still there. Or it's not completely strong wall, but you know, it's much harder to get a referendum to cross over, and that's why many politicians will fight for a specific referendum, like like right now in Denmark. You know, the Eurosceptics will are gathering signatures about EU leave from a voting on the EU leave, just like Brexit. And they will do it, of course, within the interest of the community in Denmark and so on. But if someone would have to do a similar referendum Europe-wide, well, not necessarily EU leave, that is up to every country, but similar referendums that could be welfare referendum, you know, all kind of policies that influence all of us. You know, that they're missing this strong foothold. And I think that we will not be able to practice this referendum until we figure out how to make politics cross borders fast. You know, maybe you can learn from Eurovision contest or somehow. They're doing a good job, sadly. But yeah, that's what I can comment on. Yeah.
Stefan?
Yes, well, I think, of course, I mean, you bring up some good points, Narcis, and there's no question that, or the democratic deficit might be a bit overrated, because the EU is an institution where there is one directly democratically elected body, and then the rest of the bodies with more or less participating with the participation of more or less directly elected politicians, and where there's not, it is institutions with very heavy democratic oversight, like for instance the Commission. But I still think, it doesn't. The point is that the people who will often complain about the undemocratically or the unelected bureaucrats, as they're called in the EU, like the Commission, as a president of the council, are the people who don't really trust their national politicians. So they sort of recognize that, okay, we have to vote for these people because we don't really have any other choice. We need some politicians. But as going so far as to make these politicians responsible of electing somebody else, I think that's it's only one step. It's only one step removed from the voter, but I think that is one step too many for many people. I don't know what the solution is going to be, though. I mean, is it? I mean, we've talked about direct democracy, but when it comes to the executive body of the European Union, what is that going to look like? Is it going to be emulating the Federal Council of Switzerland, where you have like a council that makes up the head of government, or are you going to have a sort of parliamentary system, or with a prime minister, or are you going to have a semi-presidential system like in France? No matter what, I think the people will need to be engaged. Otherwise, I think there's going to be a lot of mistrust, and no matter that is going to be very toxic for the workings of the EU. I think, if we don't fix that problem.
Thank you, Stefan. Manuel, would you like to say a few words about the discussion?
Looking on how to create about this distance between some institutions and the general society, and in some places in Europe more than others, there's been a growing gap between the two sides, the institutional, national and European, and the society, but not apart from the people creating steps like electing a representative who elects another representative on another body to decide on this or that. But on the other side, there's also the societal part that also created herself in some areas more than others, a gap themselves between them and the political sphere. Many people in several areas of Europe are living more and more individual lives, concerning about their own sphere, about the job they have to do, their family responsibilities, and they turn their lives about it, and they concentrate more their lives on that, and leaving less space to more social awareness and participation. So they start seeing, oh, creating that gap or that democratic deficit. Oh, the politicians are on this instance or that body deciding that for me. I'll carry on with my life. I think that the institutions themselves, like the political parties, or other cross-country organizations, also have to broaden themselves and find a way to reach out to the people and see how different kinds of participation can have an impact on their lives. Also, creating platforms of communication, discussion, also on that side, also to reduce that gap, that distance, and making realize that sometimes that even participating on something that is on a European level isn't that something that is far, far away, possibly in a different country, but there's something that they can start doing on the places and the communities they live.
Thank you, Manuel. So we have, okay, Edgar would like to say something first.
A stupid microphone. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I can add something also to suggestions of possible solutions as well. And I got reminded about something when Stefan was mentioning about how politicians that become distant from their national politicians, and in result not really having a big trust into what, or not following necessarily the national political interest, but following their position in which they are elected by whoever in a European level. That's of course the entire European community that they're responsible before. And now that we think about how to prevent this unbiased kind of political influence from national politics going into the European politics, and then just making it as a fighting arena where everyone just wants their piece of cake. Aside from what I already said earlier, there's another kind of a possible inspiration to get, and that is called sortition. It is, in other words, it's called a lottery voting. It's a form of voting or choosing your representatives or delegates, whoever. It's a practice also dates back from ancient Greece and is still used in many cases today. So, probably many of you have heard about it. They use it in some universities. In the US, they use it for the juries in the courts. It's a random selection of who's going to be representing the public. And you could implement that as well in the European institutions. And in one sense, you can say, well, this is not going to be a person elected by the majority or the people, but it might be a candidate from wherever, and he will be candidating into a certain position, and you could make a list of hundreds and thousands of people that could be candidating for it. Then you would just put them in a sortition process, a random selection. In that sense, you will get diverse views and people into it. Not necessarily they can have to be from a specific background, from elite of a political class that has been running. It can be anyone. And once they're there, you don't have to be also that much experience. You're doing politics. It's like no one should be afraid of trying it. And once you're there, you will be involved in this process and sort of feeling more responsible as well, probably. Because now you don't have a political group that is backing you up. You are basically working based on luck. But while you're working there, you have a responsibility of just focusing on your job, not on fighting about, oh, I want to be re-elected there, Well, no, you won't, because it will depend on luck, not how much lobbying you will get, not how much other political campaigns you will win. It's all about you getting into that position, if you're lucky or not, and then we will see how good you are at it. But again, that's a question about where we can implement that method. Clearly not everyone. And this is an example how to avoid corruption as well, if necessary. So that's just another part in the inspiration.
Thank you again for the small comments.
Yeah, you're welcome.
You take time.
Yeah, that was really interesting. It's the first time I'm hearing about this. I'm not sure it's a good idea, but I think it certainly is an interesting one. Yeah, I just wanted to come with a quick remark. There's absolutely no question that the recent crisis that we have experienced in Europe, the financial crisis, Euro crisis, the migrant crisis, have been absolutely terrible. But at the very least, it seems to be some of the factors that have done most to create sort of a European demos, because for the past few years, all Europeans have been talking about the same things. And I'm seeing this happening slowly but certainly pretty much everywhere, even in nationalist groupings, far-right groupings. European identity sort of slowly building up a sort of acknowledgement that, okay, these countries are have a shared destiny of some sort, and I think it's only if it continues being this terrible, then then we'll soon have a European demos, if the crisis don't kill the union in the process.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. Well, to say about the European demos, basically you're kind of right that right now we all talk kind of talking about the same thing. I mean, more and more people are watching elections that are happening in certain countries, even though it's not theirs, because for different reasons. But I still think that in order for us to create a European demos, we need to focus on education. There is no European curriculum across EU. There is no European education class or European citizenship class. I mean, since 1992, we have all the same citizenship, which is the European citizenship. So automatically we should learn about its rights and responsibilities the first years of schools when we are aware enough of our surroundings, of what's happening, that we should know about our identity, which is a European identity. So that should be something that I think we as an organization could lobby for, something we could push for, some kind of European class, European citizenship class. What's your take on that? Who wants to say it? Just use unblock your microphone.
Yeah, well, I think some people might argue that something like that, where you sort of institutionalize some sort of European or Western identity, sort of exists in the upper secondary schools. With I am really not sure what English word to use, but dannelse, you know, like a knowledge about the classical civilizations, knowledge about classical literature, and knowledge about the history in general, European history. I think strengthening those elements that already exist might it's not exactly what you're asking for, but it might have a sort of similar effect.
Okay. Manuel?
Stefan, although the idea of being from this country or that country and European is geographically inherited, although people think about it or not. How can be, for example, a French or an Italian or a Swiss and not be European?
Okay, thank you, Manuel. Edgar?
It's always difficult to press the mic. Well, about EU-wide education or a common educational system.
No, sorry, not system. That's a whole overhaul. I'm only talking about introducing a European citizenship class in the curriculum everywhere, which is similar.
No, a specific class, a subject.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I would, in that case, I would probably object that, because as an idea, in a sense that, well, no one really does that anymore. Not as far as I know, unless you are extremely trying to indoctrinate people into specific kind of personality or identity that you're afraid that it will go away. It's not really reasonable to put a huge focus on it, because I think that's just going to distract the attention from what really makes you as a person you are, as a human, as living on this planet. It's more about, like Stefan maybe mentioned, when we do learn about history, and I think we put too much focus on the European history. In fact, I think we should cherish all the history in the world in order for us not to be alienated from the rest of the world. Same case goes for religions, actually. And in Sweden, in schools, as far as I'm aware, they have a religion class where they teach all religions. Well, not in a sense of religious kind of a church teaching, but as a subject, as a scientific subject, to teach what is this, what do they believe in, and yada yada, history and everything about all world religions. We could do the same about everything in terms of history, which we kind of do, but we put a stronger focus on usually on the national history and then the European, and then kind of it fades away when it comes to the global part.
A bit, Edgar, sorry, but what I'm trying to say, it's not about history or the culture. What I'm trying to say, it's about most people, most young people have no idea what the European means or is, especially in Eastern Europe. If you ask them on the street and you tell them what is European Union, they have no idea what that is. And I think it's because of a lack of education. So regardless of how much European history or European culture you know, if you don't know the basics of what the European Union is, it's impossible for you to think or to think that you have that identity.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Yeah, but well, when speaking about the identity, I don't really care about the identity so much. But when you talk about now, when you mention this political structure or the structure of the European Union, then I agree. Then that it could be an important part, and that probably can be implemented as part of politics classes that I had, for example, in high school, which there was a little bit of European.
A little bit.
A little bit, of course. There was not enough for me. The most things I learned about how European Union works, and still I haven't learned everything, was by myself. And of course, those similar way as there's a politics class, or whatever they call them, that is teaching or presenting how their country works, their government. That has to be linked, of course, with the European structures as well.
But don't you think that we need to have some kind of European citizenship class earlier than high school? Because many people today, less and less people are finishing high school or getting there. So maybe it's more important that kids in the secondary school, that we actually have early secondary school, even primary school, I would say, that you need to have European citizenship, because you need to know what that blue flag around you is. What is the anthem of Europe? And why can I just go anywhere in Europe without stopping? Why is that, Daddy? I mean, questions like that kids should be able to answer, even for kindergarten if he was after me, but maybe that's too radical. But you get my point.
Yeah. Well, if we're talking about learning politics and in the earlier 8 years of school, yeah, why not? I think it's important because when we talk about youth empowerment and things like that, in some countries, the youth is more involved as well in local politics in some way, in some not so well. So I don't see why not to get young people more involved, get them out there, try to encourage them to be more involved in youth organizations and so on. I don't necessarily find the theory part so amusing as much as the practice of it. So I would give them to learn in practice, to let them go travel to different summer camps or different countries in the European Union or the world, and learn it in practice, the political activity. The theory part, they will learn that when they do that probably. So, or when they reach the high school or whenever it becomes the boring part. But I think I think that's a good idea, but making more practical would be maybe better.
Well, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, there's lots of tools already created for practical. There's a lot of simulation games, really fun actually, that you can use to entertain people. Stefan, you had a comment?
Yes, I think it's sort of made out to be a bigger deal than I think it is. I mean, just include more knowledge about the European Union in political class, governmental class. I mean, when I went to public school, admittedly we didn't have that much of it, but in general I think we should have had more political classes in general. And then when you go to high school, when you go to the gymnasium, then you have more of it. I think there's about a half a year in political class for the C level, where much of it is just dedicated to something that is related to the European Union. So I think if people don't know enough about the European Union and about their rights, about why things are the way they are, then just have a more focus on it in political class. If you have a European citizenship class, that is, I mean, even if the purpose of it is benign, it is going to be seen as an attempt at indoctrination, and I think that is going to do more harm to the project than good. I think if you're going to include some sort of learning about the European citizenship, and you need to put it under some other umbrella, for instance, political class.
Okay, so basically the conclusion of this would be to have more, something that we could support would be that inclusion of more information and more practical things related to the European Union during the school years so basically that would be the conclusion, right? Is that what you're saying, Stefan?
Yes, most definitely, yes.
Okay. Manuel, do you agree with them? Sorry, you have to start again.
Are you listening? Can you hear it?
Yeah, now, yeah.
I was. I agree that and like what we was discussing right now, especially with a Stefan view, that it can be positive, but if you overpress it, it can do more harm than good.
Okay, thank you, Manuel. Actually, I have one question to you guys. I don't understand, how does a person gain a national identity? Through what channels or means? How do you start realizing that you are Danish or you are Swedish? When does it start? Because there must be some way that the government or the national state it's indoctrinating you to believe that, right? Edgar?
Well, it's quite simple, but at the same time a long story. It's a story of life. Basically, from the beginning, you're born. You are assigned a label. It's assigned by the community you live in. It's a kind of a traditional practice happening in your community. It's not only systematic indoctrination, as I would call it still, but it's also cultural influence. So the institutional part plays a huge role in this as well. When we mentioned history, for example, when there's a large portion of your history classes have a strong focus on your country or your nationality, you're obviously going to become more familiar with it, and if the rhetoric goes to the right way, you're going to become more patriotic. The use of anthems, the use of symbols, how suddenly it's all visible everywhere. You're part of this kind of indoctrination during all your childhood, all your youth times, maybe all your life as well, if you don't resist it. This is when I started to realize that this is all bullshit, and I started saying, no, why suddenly an institution thinks that this specific history is more important than the rest of the world, and that's why I find it unfair. And there's a quote as well. Actually, it's on my wall here in my room. You know, I can just quote you that now. You know, patriotism, you know, is just a sparkly object which is sold to the public so that they are distracted from what is really happening around them. as long as nations are working against each other, the human race will never be united. So, well,
A big room, I guess, because you keep walking for like 2 minutes.
oh, it's not really a big room. It's small, but I guess I'm slow. But yeah. Well, that's one inspiration I'm following, or the value whatsoever. Yeah. So that's the thing. It's a part of this, part of the society that's already not only institutionalized indoctrination, but it's cultural as well. So it's possible to fight against it, and that only requires you some discussions and I guess more open lifestyle, or what you could say. But that's what I think.
Okay, thank you, Edgar.
Oh shit.
Does any of you, Manuel or Stefan, have a comment? Just write to me in the chat, or just say it. Okay, otherwise, I think, okay, Stefan, give it the short one.
Yeah, short one. It can mention many of the crucial parts like symbols, anthems, flags, and so on. I think for most countries, for most nation states, the thing that really seals the deal is language, because when you can speak to people, it is it's much more easy to relate to them. Now, I know that is not the case for all countries like Belgium, Switzerland, Canada. There are multilingual countries. I don't really know how the national identity is created in those countries, but I think if we learned from those cases, especially Switzerland, it seems to be the most functional one, I think we might have the key to how to make a sort of European demos, or at least an acceptance among the European people that there is a level above the national state.
Okay, that was a good comment, Stefan. So we talked a lot until now about European demos. Now we should talk about the other part of the so-called democratic legitimacy. Okay, so I will say about the federalist view on this. I mean, we the federalists, we believe that we should have a bicameral European Parliament, with the lower chamber being the current European Parliament and the upper chamber being the current Council of the Ministers, for which the elections take place on the same date all over the Union, with the transnational list of real European political parties, with the candidate to become the next Commission President. This Parliament should elect a Commission based on their competences, not national quota, and the entire Commission should be accountable to the Parliament. Moreover, qualified majority voting should be the rule of all decision making, and the veto of the member states abolished. That's what that's why the Federalists in 1977 through Richard Corbett coined the term democratic deficit, because this is our vision. This is a vision of how Europe will actually properly work in the future. And it's a vision that our organization supports for dozens of years. So what do you think about that? Stefan?
Yeah, just a quick question. The thing you just read out loud beside it, where do you read that? Is that your personal opinion, or is that Jeff, or?
That's Jeff's opinion.
Okay. Yeah, well, it sounds very good. I think.
Really?
Well, yeah, it's very. If I were to disagree with some of it, it would be caveats. I think most of it is it's pretty all right. I think it sounds like. One thing that you might have to deal with is, and it's really just semantics, but commission. I think the commission has such a poisoned reputation in Europe, and that you need to call it something else.
Government. European government. That's what it is anyway.
Yeah, you can pretty much call it anything at this point. Commission just
The dog house.
Okay, Edgar, you wanted to add to this? What do you think about the Federalist view on how we can solve the democratic deficit?
Is Stefan done with the comment?
I guess so. Stefan?
Oh, well, I have a further comment to
Yes.
this, but I think just if Edgar has something to say, I think he should.
Okay. Well, I think the idea to create bicameral, the lower house and the upper house system, it's like, well, it's nothing new, I believe, as idea. I mean, as a practice. Yeah, many large federal countries use that system, but if we remember the possible solutions that we were brainstorming a bit before, none of it really kind of fits into that. And again, I don't really find how that will improve the democratic process or the demos of the European Union. You're just gonna make a similar system that is maybe similar to any other federal country, which is not even better in terms of democratic process and so on. As I said, it's all about how much influence people do have in no matter what is that institution. Is this lower house, upper house, government, councils? It's all about how much influence people do have in the process of all the political decision making. I think that's the most vital. Well, that is the most powerful democratic institution, as you might call it. It's the demos, right? And that's what we should focus probably more. And when we do find the need for an extra institution, then yeah, we will have to create probably something. You can have an upper house as well, and I'm not sure about whether it should be the European Council though. But if people, and not in a sense of as it is today, just the ministers were gathering in.
No. So just
Yep.
to explain, the upper house and the will mean that it will be like it is the council of ministers, but it's not the council of ministers. That will be deleted. You'll have directly elected people there as well, like in the other
Okay.
way.
In
So
other
everyone
words,
will be directly elected. Everyone will be directly besides the government, which
okay.
the party who wins the most votes makes the government. So like
Yeah.
normal democracies. That's the maximum, the closest we can get to a so-called perfect democracy. But even then, it's not perfect. National state doesn't have a perfect democracy either. So, but in a way, it will eliminate. I mean, you cannot complain about democracy in Europe in that moment anymore, because the argument of the Eurosceptics is that the national state is more democratic than the European Union. But if the European Union goes that way and becomes in a federal system, then they will not be able to say anymore, oh, the European Union is less democratic than the national state, because that's not possible. And the entire argument is being destroyed. Stefan?
Uh-huh.
Yes, well, it will still be possible to their view because they'll argue that there's not a demos, so there will not be a democracy. But that wasn't really what I wanted to mention. I thought maybe instead of a council of ministers, one could have a senate, or even a senate instead of a parliament. It sort of depends on. I think we should really know what the European people want. Do they want something where there is a lot of state representation, or do they want something that is more rooted in the people? Like, do they want equal amount of votes among the member states, or do they want something that is more representational to the populations of these countries? Like in the Council of Ministers, for instance, the vote that each minister has is sort of calculated by the populations each country have. Like you might do something a bit like what was done in the United States after the Great Compromise between the small states and the big states, where they had a Senate with 2 members from each state that have the same voting power. Maybe in the Council of Ministers you would have something where each minister has a vote that is of equal weight. And I think when it comes to national vetoes, I think obviously formal vetoes should be abolished completely. But I think something that we do have today, maybe in a lesser degree, but a soft veto is something that would be a good idea. Like when that a country can, if they really think that the decision that is going to be made is fundamentally not in their interest, then there should be some sort of consensus or sort of gentleman's agreement that okay, then we'll do what we can to accommodate that difference. Because I think for the immediate future, I think we'll have to live with the fact that the European countries are sort of different, and when it comes to some issues, the interests are not always aligned. And a lot of consideration is putting into that now, and I think for the immediate future that will still have to be the case, at least to some degree, I think.
But that's why we have the transnational lists. That's why the transnational list ignores your citizenship. Like you're not Romanian or Danish. You're just European, and that's the only thing that's being taken in consideration. And it will not matter. It will only be the most capable people to convince people across the whole Europe that get in power, regardless of their background, so that national interest is not an issue anymore. Such thing as country interest will not exist anymore, because in US, for example, in the federal system, a federal state cannot just because it goes against its principles. It could be too much, I don't know, Christian state. It doesn't mean that they can just say, fuck you to the federal government. What do you think, Eldar?
Well, I personally don't really have much opinion on that, but if we look at in regards to identity, I can maybe comment something. When we do consider everyone as just Europeans or just whatever, one common identity, as you say. I don't know for how far does that works. Might as well ditch the entire identity part, because there's again the challenge of language that makes you different, your cultural background and so on. But if that, usually that's not probably the need for you to know what's your background or so on, unless it's related to the whatever policy or topic it is being discussed about. So yeah, I don't think finding is the identity part could be the only solution to that. But when it comes to systematic solutions, then I can't comment more on that right now.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Stefan?
Yes, I think the identity question is certainly crucial. I think I really like what you proposed before, but I think for different reasons. You were talking about a lesser emphasis on national and European history and more emphasis on world history, and not just learning about Christianity or Judaism, but about all the religions. I think that sort of thinking is going to be crucial while building a European identity for the reason that I don't know if you know the phrase, but the person who knows one country knows no country. Like if you only know about the thing that really has set this project aside, like that has been a regressive effect on it, has been the fact that there's been a European solipsism sort of that Europeans sort of see this as the world. This continent is sort of the world, and anything outside of it is largely irrelevant. That Europe has been in charge of the world for so long that it is difficult for some people to sort of remind themselves that there's a world outside there that Europe is no longer in control of. And I think if we were to learn more about cultures from all over the world, I think it would be easier to properly distinguish, okay, this is Europe and this is not, whereas and that would sort of strengthen the identity. I think something that strengthens the national identity is knowledge about Europe. Okay, so the Danes know that they're not Italians. They know that they're not Greek. They know this because of the cultural differences. They have experienced them because they have gone there to vacation, but they might not know that much about the world outside. And I think with that knowledge, a European identity might emerge.
Okay, thank you. So it seems that discussion went a bit more philosophical, although really good point with that you made there. It's a different thinking that I never
Well,
thought. Yes, Edgar?
well, if we do learn about the entire world, which would be a great thing, we would not really discover how European we are, but we would discover how world citizen we are.
Well, if you follow his logic, then not really, because if people learn now about Europe, then they discover how Danish they are. So if they learn about the world, they discover how European they are. So basically, they need to learn about the fucking galaxy to discover how Earth they are.
Yeah, but when you put a focus on the differences, right? But you could find the differences in any society, but you could also find a lot of similarities, especially in this global society. So who you call a European is also like debatable, right? It has no criteria for it, really. It's up to people, really. Sorry?
It's about your passport.
Well, in that case, there's nothing to do with whatever culture you have.
No.
Then it is irrelevant how you feel yourself, whether you know about the world or you don't.
Okay, Stefan, you said you have a short reply?
Yeah. I just when learning about the world, traveling more around the world, I'm not saying that it is going to create a more that Europeans are going to be more hostile towards the world because they realize that, okay, now we're European and these people are not like us at all. They're very different. It might create more sympathy, but because they get to learn about these people. And yes, you're right. We will see some similarities, but when the thing is that when you don't know about anything, if you know about the set of customs that are in your country, if you don't know about any other set of customs, you're going to think that those customs are universal. So the less you know about the world, the more you think typically that the world is like what you think it is. Like when it comes to the United States, for instance, many Europeans think that they know about the United States because they watch Disney, they watch the movies, TV series, they eat American food. But when you move to the United States and when you visit it and when you learn Americans, when you learn about them and their life and their culture, the more you learn about the United States, the more you realize that you're completely ignorant about them, and then the more you realize that they're very different from Europeans, and that is also something that creates a European identity that is distinct from, say, a Western identity. So I think learning about oneself is healthy. It doesn't have to be divisive. I acknowledge that it could be. It could be divisive. It could be that people think, oh yeah, we're world citizens, and then they visit Africa and India, and then they realize, oh, the world is a terrible place. I'm European for life, and fuck the rest. But I don't think, for the majority of people, I don't think that will be the case, or at least hope that will be the case.
So to conclude these discussions is that, in a way, getting a European identity will, in a way, create a European demos. And once we have this European demos, it will be easier to change the current political system and create a political union in the true sense of the word. So the idea is now, should we push for a radical change, considering what's happening with Britain, or should we take one small step out of the whole process and lobby for it now? What do you think, Stefan?
That is that's a tough one. I mean, I just did you so just to understand your question right, should we lobby for more unity, more democracy, more federalism now, or wait until the Brits have left us? Is that the question you're posing?
The question is like this: should we lobby for Europe to turn their political system into a true political union, federal system, or should we say, okay, maybe this time we can get transnationalists, and we aim that we get for the next 5 years transnationalists, one step closer to our final destination. So should we ask for a radical change now, or should we take small steps? Because usually after crisis, Europe is more open to radical change. That's how we got the European Parliament to be directly elected in the first place. So, and to get the European citizenship concept, which if someone would have proposed it today, it would have been murder. So, should we use the moment of British exit in case it happens and ask for a federal Europe, just like the 6 original countries are planning to do? So.
Yeah, well, it is said that the European Union is built on crises, and I think that is going to be the case for a long time. It's very difficult to argue that we need this if the actual need for it has not presented itself. Like with the refugee crisis, and I hate mentioning it because that's always what it ends up being about. But I mean, if we are going to have a European Coastal Guard and the European border control, if Frontex is going to have more power, this is the time to do it. And I mean, some people who advocate for open borders might dislike the notion, but it'll still be a progress towards more European unity, and it'll be a move that many people, especially on the right, who usually dislike the European Union, actually would be in favor of. And when it comes to the financial crisis, like the banking unions and other such things, more financial control is also something that would happen in this case. So yeah, I think we should be very slow to push for things, and only if there seems to be, we should push for things when there's least resistance to them, I think. Because if we are going to push boulders upside a hill, then we could do nothing else, and it'll get tiresome. I think we should, it sounds lazy, but I think we should reach for the low-hanging fruit as often as possible, and then slowly but surely build a united Europe that the people can get behind on also. Because if the people is not behind it, then once we build it, the people are just going to crash it.
Thank you, Stefan. Edgar, what's your say on it?
Well, when looking at radical changes, I guess it's a matter of a strategy, or yeah, as Stefan said, when the time comes and you see the need for it, you will see that people slowly get mobilized, and then it goes faster. Once that happens. But I think there have been many cases where, I mean, in order for the entire European population to mobilize in having a radical change, it probably has to be a crisis like the financial crisis that hit hard pretty much everyone, well, at least the working class and all those who were affected by it, and there were changes in local politics as well. But and well, also European level changes when it came to the banks and so on. There weren't that much happening in regards to countries that are going into hard austerity and depression, like Greece, for example. No one really went in solidarity with Greece, so Greece had to fight for itself. And if it happens in one European country, it doesn't necessarily means a radical change will come. So maybe the Brexit thing is a radical change for Britain, which I guess it is, or will be if they vote for leave. But for Europe, it might not be, because there isn't that much solidarity amongst the Europeans.
But Brexit would trigger a financial crisis once again.
Well, yeah, and that's
everywhere.
Yeah, and that's why if it does trigger a crisis that affects everyone or most of the Europeans, then of course there will be certain need for a radical change again. And I hope that that radical change is not going to go for another model of austerity that we have seen, how Greece has been treated, how people were treated unfairly.
That was not radical change. That was just what was
No,
possible.
but there was certainly a need for it, right? They were suffering from consequences of the problems, economic issues.
Yeah, but they didn't make any changes in institutions. They didn't make any changes in political model. They didn't make any advance on the union being more united, more closer. That was just policy.
Yes, they certainly did the opposite. Quite, I would say they kind of discouraged people of, or made a distrust to certain European institutions by doing that. But that's the thing. I mean, it's about how connected or how well can we collaborate as communities and so on. That's again would have been easier if we would had a better democratic process into this. And if we do end up in a crisis, I do hope that we take a radical change first by not saying, okay, let's dissolve this, but saying, let's change these European institutions and take more power into them, because we don't trust how they work, if that's the case.
Wait, did you say to take more power from them or to give them more power?
From them, yeah.
But that's not really possible, because right now the European institutions don't have enough power to solve any of the crises that are happening.
Well, in the sense of, I mean, taking more influence in a Europe scale, in collaboration and in the entire European Union, right? As a democratic society.
Yes.
I don't mean that we're gonna take over control of every country there is. I mean that the European institutions that already exist, that they have certain responsibility and policies that influence quite a lot of parts of our lives. And as I said, and you mentioned, if the Brexit will cause a common crisis for Europeans, it's going to be a responsibility of the European institutions or the European citizens to come together and solve it. I'm afraid a bit if that goes only in the hands of European institutions, because I don't trust them. Not many people do trust them.
But that's why we change the model, right?
Right, but that's the thing. Who gets there first? Is it the European institution that's gonna make something unpopular again, like it happened with Greece, or is it gonna be the people or political movements that will rise up and start involving people into this process of how we deal with this common European issue? And
the 6 original countries have signed an agreement that the moment Britain votes out, in that moment, the 6 of them will start procedures to form a federal government of the Eurozone.
Yeah, well,
Eurozone itself would be a federal Europe.
that's the thing. Who proposed these different
6
solutions?
original countries, the 6 presidents of each country. I mean, each president of the 6 original countries.
Yeah, each president, not the people. Again, it's only 6 countries. We have 28.
Yeah, but those
Uh,
are the
but
original ones.
yeah, but even if this change comes from a political elite of every country, that still is not going to solve. It's not going to be concrete, or it's not going to be very, let's say, democratic. If we wanted the European Union to become democratic, it has to, in a democratic process, has to be made in such, you know. So it's not about whether the leaders of different countries will vote on these reforms, as they always do, same as with treaties. And citizens, again, they don't know nothing about these treaties that politicians vote for. This is going to be some kind of a treaty or a last constitution, whatever you call it, a common law that no one knows about it except the representatives, that a small group of people.
But
so if we do want the future Europe to be more democratic, I would hope that the population will be very involved in it before the political elite gets to make the final decision.
It's up to us as an organization to do that. We are a grassroots organization. We represent the people. So it's our job, in a way, to make people more aware of this project and of these ideas.
Well, yes, but you know that we can't do it on our own. I mean, when we talk about demos, it's not only about us as an organization. It's also about everyone, all the institutions of every country, unions of every country. And there are also federal groups already made, like common political groups, NGOs. And, this requires that if we're coming to a change, it has to come in interest to as many as possible. So.
The idea is quite simple, Edgar. We just need to create the possibility for the European Union to be able to solve crisis. If they have that ability and possibility, then people will start trusting them more, because they'll see, oh look, the refugee crisis solved, the financial crisis solved. Why? Because they had the right power to do so. Right now, the national states, are they doing everything in their power to disrupt and to make sure that the European institutions are being seen as a bad thing? So what I'm trying to say is that the national politicians are afraid that if the European Union is being viewed more and more positively by the population, then their role will lose any significance, basically. Once the European Union is able to properly solve all the problems, then you will need to have national politicians. So that's why they do everything in their power to not allow the European Union to work properly, to not allow the European Union to solve things, and to not give the European Union the proper chance and the proper democratic ways of solving things. I would like to hear now, because we are a bit late, I would like to hear now from all of you on the last words on democratic deficit, and then we can close this session for today, which was extremely informative from my side. Stefan, would you like to be first?
Yes, well, it is said in engineering that you have reached perfection not when there's nothing more to add, but when there's nothing more to take away. And I think when it comes to political systems and also to the European Union, that is a good philosophy to have. I think one of the problems that some people might have with the European Union is that it is meddling too much in areas that many people do not really think that such our level of government should be concerned with. And here I want to mention the subsidiary principle again. I think if it will help the European Union tremendously if big issues are decided at the European level and medium issues are decided at the national level and smaller issues at the local level. And I think that will also remedy the issue that you mentioned, Narcis, a very real issue that national governments, of course, fear legitimacy issues. If certain things like education and healthcare is still under the national state, and defense and foreign policy, for instance, are on the European level, then I think that the national states will still have importance in the eyes of the public. So yeah, that was just my final comment.
Thank you, Stefan. Manuel, what would you like to be your final comment? Just let me unlock your microphone. Okay, you have the word now.
Sorry. I think that this part about this is also a little bit, as we were talking a little bit before, Stefan also saying about also this power struggle and how to make a new hierarchy if there is going to be like a lower chamber and upper chamber, as the federalists were suggesting. So how to reorganize everything, and this separation also, how to deal with everything to not make participation from political and societal level so the gap so higher, and how to redistribute everything like local, regional, or European. How to make the things balance is also important things to keep at it. If we stay as with in the current model, with or without Brexit, or if we introduce the new system as a federalist, as you said, the federalists are suggesting, how to keep the things on the balance.
Thank you, Manuel. And Edgar?
What was the first question? What was the question again?
No, it's your final remarks on.
My final remarks.
Democratic deficit.
Yeah, well, there is a need to just summarize, I guess, because as I mentioned before, that if we want to envision, make a vision to how a European Union will function or should function in the future, then we certainly have to start putting it in practice. Hopefully that is gonna mobilize more people and get the process ongoing to reform this or to change the system before it fails, right? Because, as I said, when we give out too much power to a specific political institution that is very disconnected, it is most likely that they will do the work they do without regarding the interests of the public, the people that they supposedly have to work for. So I believe that we have to get to that point where people have to be more involved and know also more about how the European Union works today, but not as if it's not as a way to make a propaganda out of it, but it's about, it has to be on a discussion. You know, this is what it is today. Please criticize it if you have something better, and it has to go all the way up to the European institutions, and something has to be done in regards to that as well. So I hope that the member countries together will, with their populations, with their people, with their demos, right, if they have any, will decide on a common solution, but not as a means to, as a political interest. It will not be enough simply. And we have many examples where political institutions has failed the public interest. And if you look deeper into the grassroots of the Euroscepticism, these are one of the main issues that they're concerned about, and they are valid concerns. I clearly understand them. And they have to be addressed on how we can prevent from these issues occurring again. So that's pretty much what I can say.
Okay. I would like to thank you all for being tonight with us. This has been Democratic Deficit of the European Union Talks with European Union Denmark. And